The quiet beginning. The world knows Sundar Pichai as the calm, composed leader who shaped the way billions connect with technology. But behind the boardrooms, the headlines, and the quiet power of his voice lies a story that is not often told. This is not about Google or about Silicon Valley. This is about a man, a father, a husband, and the silent battles that shaped his heart. It begins not in wealth, not in fame, but in a small home in Chennai, India, where the smell of his mother's cooking filled the rooms, and where Sundar's dreams were far larger than the walls that held him. Imagine a young boy sitting on the floor with his brother, waiting for his father to return from work. The family did not have a television, not even a telephone at first. What they did have was a sense of closeness, of respect, and of resilience. Sundar's father, an engineer, would talk about circuits and technology as if they were stories. Sundar listened with wide eyes, not because he understood everything, but because he could sense something powerful in those conversations, something that whispered of possibilities beyond his reach. But life was not easy. The family of four shared a small apartment, and every decision came with sacrifice. When Sundar dreamed of studying abroad, it was not a simple wish. It was a financial mountain. His father quietly took out loans, knowing the risk, knowing the strain. Sundar carried the weight of that decision with him, never forgetting the price his parents were paying for his chance at a better future. Fast forward years later, Sundar stood in America carrying 2 bags, a mind full of determination and a heart filled with humility. He was quiet, almost shy, but his professors noticed something unusual in him. Not just intelligence, but patience, a rare ability to listen deeply. While others competed to speak louder, Sundar observed, and in those silences he grew stronger. Then came the long nights, the loneliness of being far from home, the moments of doubt when he asked himself if he truly belonged in this world that seemed so distant from his roots. But every time he felt close to giving in, he remembered his parents, their sacrifices, and the faith they had placed in him. Resilience became his closest companion. Years later, when Sundar entered Google, no one could have predicted how far he would go. He did not demand attention. He did not fight for the spotlight. Instead, he focused on helping others shine. In a culture filled with competition, he showed kindness. When teammates struggled, he quietly guided them. When projects failed, he shouldered responsibility instead of pointing fingers. And when he succeeded, he gave credit away generously. Slowly, people began to notice. But here is where the story begins to twist. Because while the world started to see Sundar as a rising leader, his life at home was also changing. His daughter, still young, had started asking him questions. Questions about time, about presence, about why her father was always away, always working. Sundar's heart carried a secret conflict. The man who had been given everything through sacrifice was now at risk of sacrificing too much himself. His moments with family, the laughter of his children, the soft voice of his wife at night. One evening, after a long day, Sundar returned home late. His daughter was waiting for him, a drawing in her hand. It was a simple picture made with crayons, but it hit him harder than any boardroom challenge he had ever faced. The picture showed a small girl standing next to her father, but in the drawing, the father's face was blank. "Papa," she asked softly, "is this you? Or are you too busy to be here?" The question shook him to the core. The same boy who had once looked at his father with wide eyes was now facing the reflection of his own absence. The room was silent. Sundar held the paper in his hands, his throat tight, his heart heavy. The world might have seen him as a man in control, but inside he was breaking. And in that moment, Sundar knew. His greatest challenge was not building technology for the world, but building trust within the walls of his own home. The story of Sundar Pichai's rise is not just about leadership. It is about the battles we cannot see, the tears we do not hear, the choices that every parent, every dreamer, every human must face. As Sundar looked at his daughter, a decision began to form in his mind, but what he would choose next would change everything. The distance that hurts the most. The night after his daughter handed him that drawing, Sundar lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His body was exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. The question she had asked, so small, so innocent, burned inside him like fire. He had built a life where billions of people used the products he helped create. Yet here was his own child, unsure if her father truly belonged to her. There was a silence between father and daughter that no technology could ever bridge. And for the first time in years, Sundar felt powerless. The next morning he tried to shake it off, but the image of the faceless figure in her drawing followed him to work. In the middle of meetings, While voices argued about numbers, growth, and strategies, his mind kept wandering back to the quiet room at home where his daughter had waited, holding her crayons, holding her questions. And every time he thought of it, a wave of guilt washed over him. He asked himself quietly, was success worth it if it meant becoming invisible to the people who mattered most? Yet life has a way of pulling us in two directions at once. At work, the pressure only grew. Google was expanding. Competitors were rising, and every decision seemed heavier than the last. Sundar was admired for his calm, for his ability to carry storms without breaking, but inside he felt the cracks forming. His colleagues saw a leader who never raised his voice, never lost his patience. What they did not see was a man holding back tears when he looked at a small piece of paper with a blank face drawn on it. At home, the tension began to show. His wife noticed the distance. The way Sundar seemed present but far away, like his body was at the dinner table. But his heart was still buried under piles of decisions and deadlines. His daughter, too young to understand, only knew that her father was slipping further into a world she could not reach. Sometimes she would sit beside him, trying to talk, but his phone would buzz, his laptop would light up, and the conversation would fade. One evening, as he sat on the edge of his bed, Sundar remembered his own childhood. He thought of the evenings when his father returned home late, tired but still willing to share stories. Sundar had never seen his father put work before family, even when money was tight, even when the world outside was unforgiving. That memory stung. He realized he was now standing at the same crossroads his father once faced. But unlike his father, Sundar was slowly drifting in the wrong direction. The weight of this realization grew heavier with every passing day. He began noticing the little things, the way his daughter's smile dimmed when he said he was busy, the way she stopped asking him to play because she already knew his answer. And then came a moment that shook him even more deeply. He returned home one night to find his daughter asleep on the couch, clutching a note in her hand. Carefully, he unfolded it. In her uneven handwriting, she had written, "Papa, do you still see me?" Those 6 words nearly broke him. It was not anger. It was not blame. It was something far worse. It was doubt. His daughter was beginning to wonder if she mattered to him at all. Sundar sat there in silence, holding the note, tears welling in his eyes. For a man who had once crossed oceans with nothing but determination, who had faced the loneliness of foreign lands, who had climbed the highest peaks of corporate life, this simple question from his child was the hardest blow of all. He promised himself then that something had to change. But promises are easy to make in the stillness of night and much harder to keep in the noise of day. And so the battle began, between the father and the CEO, between the man who wanted to hold his daughter close and the leader who felt the weight of millions on his shoulders. Yet the truth is, Sundar was not sure if he could win both fights. The phone that would not stop ringing. The phone call came at the exact moment Sundar had promised himself he would put everything aside. He had been standing in the living room watching his daughter set up a small tea party with her dolls. Her laughter echoed softly, filling the house with a warmth he had missed for too long. He wanted to step in, to sit cross-legged on the carpet and drink invisible tea from plastic cups, but then the phone lit up. The name on the screen was one he could not ignore. It was not just another work call. It was urgent, heavy, and filled with consequences. For a long second he hesitated. His hand hovered over the phone, torn between the life he lived inside his home and the one that demanded him outside of it. His daughter noticed the hesitation. She looked at him, her small hands frozen on a teacup. She did not say anything, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. Would he choose her this time, or would the phone win again? Sundar's chest tightened. He knew what she was thinking because he had seen that same look in the mirror as a boy, waiting for his own father to return. He wanted to be different. He wanted to show her that family mattered more than anything. And yet, he reached for the phone. The voice on the other end was urgent, words tumbling fast. A crisis with a product, a risk to millions of users, a meeting that had to happen now. Sundar listened quietly, but his eyes remained fixed on his daughter. She was sitting there, her back straight, her small face growing still. When he finally ended the call, the room had changed. The laughter was gone, the dolls were untouched, and his daughter was walking slowly away, carrying her little teacup set back into her room. He stood there, frozen, with a guilt so heavy it made his hands tremble. He wanted to call after her to explain, but what could he say? That the world needed him more than she did? That millions of strangers outweighed the weight of one small girl's heart? No words could make sense of that. Not to her, and not to himself. That night he sat alone at the dining table long after everyone had gone to bed. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels sharp and cold. He picked up the note she had left days ago. "Papa, do you still see me?" and read it over and over again. It was as if the words were carved into his heart, refusing to let him sleep. For the first time in his life, Sundar felt like a failure, not in the eyes of his company, not in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of his child. Success suddenly felt like an illusion. He had everything people dreamed of, yet here he was, unable to hold on to the simplest, purest bond of all. The next morning he tried to make things right. He offered to walk her to school. She agreed, but her silence was heavy. The streets were filled with the usual chaos of cars and bicycles, but between father and daughter, there were no words. Halfway there, she finally spoke, her voice quiet, almost breaking. "Papa, do you love your work more than me?" The question pierced him like nothing else ever had. He stopped walking, his breath caught in his throat. He knelt down to her level, looking into her eyes. He wanted to say the right thing, the perfect thing, but all he managed was a whisper. "No, I love you more than anything." She nodded slowly, but the doubt lingered on her face, like a shadow he could not erase. When he returned home after dropping her off, Sundar sat in his car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. For the first time he wondered if the balance he was chasing was impossible to find. Could a man truly serve the world and his family at the same time? Or was every step forward in one direction a step away from the other? The thought haunted him. And just when he began to think about making changes, another unexpected moment arrived. An email that would soon force him to choose in a way he never had before. The choice no one prepared him for, the email sat in his inbox like a weight. Sundar stared at the subject line. Urgent. Leadership decision required. But his mind was still with his daughter's question from that morning. He had told her he loved her more than anything, yet his own actions seemed to say the opposite. Now, here was another demand from the world pressing in at the very moment he needed to step back. He hesitated, knowing that opening the message would pull him into another storm. But the pressure of silence was unbearable. Slowly he clicked. The message was brief but sharp. A major issue had surfaced, and the board wanted him to take charge personally. There were doubts, voices in the company questioning if Sundar had the strength to lead through what might become a public crisis. It was more than a technical failure, it was a test of trust. If handled poorly, millions of users would lose faith and the company's reputation could be scarred. Sundar closed his eyes. The room around him faded, and in its place came the image of his daughter's note. Her handwriting shaky, asking if he still saw her. Two worlds were colliding, demanding him in full. One was loud, urgent, and global. The other was quiet, tender, and personal, and he was standing in the middle, being torn apart. For days, Sundar buried himself in the crisis. Long meetings, endless discussions, reports that filled the hours until night bled into morning. People admired his calm, his ability to bring order when others panicked. But behind that calm, he was carrying another storm. Each night when he came home, he noticed how his daughter's voice grew softer, how her eyes no longer lit up when she saw him. The distance between them was no longer invisible. It was a wall slowly rising higher with every missed moment. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. As he returned late, he found his wife waiting at the table. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a quiet firmness. She slid the same note across the table, the one that asked, "Papa, do you still see me?" Only this time she had added her own words beneath it. "She needs you now, not later." Sundar's heart sank. He felt exposed, as though someone had read the part of him he kept hidden from the world. His wife did not raise her voice, she did not argue. She simply said, "You are building trust with the world, Sundar, but what about here in your own home?" Those words pierced him more deeply than any criticism from colleagues or competitors ever could. He realized that leadership was not only about guiding a company, but about guiding the hearts that trusted him at home. For the first time in years, he considered stepping back, choosing family over ambition. The thought frightened him, but it also gave him a strange sense of relief. Yet life rarely allows such choices without consequence. The very next morning, a message arrived. The board was calling for him to travel overseas immediately to handle the crisis face to face. It was not optional. It was not negotiable. If he refused, his position itself could be at risk. He sat in silence, the world buzzing around him, his daughter eating breakfast quietly at the table, his wife pretending not to notice his hesitation. Inside, Sundar was breaking. If he left now, he knew what it would cost at home. If he stayed, he knew what it could cost at work. And as his phone buzzed again, reminding him of the flight he had to catch, Sundar felt the walls of both worlds pressing in closer than ever before. The whisper at the door, her voice was so faint that Sundar almost thought he had imagined it. Suitcase in hand, his fingers grazing the cold metal of the door handle, he froze. His daughter stood a few steps behind him. Her pajamas rumpled, her hair still messy from sleep. She looked so small in that hallway, yet the words she spoke carried a weight that no board meeting, no crisis, no headline could ever match. "Papa, if you leave now, will you come back for me? Or will you come back only for them?" The words struck like lightning. Sundar turned slowly, his chest tightening. He wanted to rush to her, to hold her, to tell her she was the only reason he ever came back at all. But his throat was locked. His heart tangled between duty and love. The silence stretched long, and in that silence, he saw the truth reflected in her eyes. Doubt, quiet hurt, the kind of wound that does not bleed but scars deeply. He bent down, setting the suitcase on the floor, and for a moment he almost abandoned everything. He almost chose to stay. But then his phone buzzed again, vibrating insistently against the wood of the suitcase. The sound broke the fragile stillness, dragging him back into the world that never stopped demanding. He whispered to her, "I will always come back for you," and kissed her forehead. But even as he said it, he felt the hollowness of words that could not erase absence. The flight that day was long, yet Sundar barely noticed the miles passing beneath him. He stared out the window, the clouds endless, his mind replaying her whisper again and again. For the first time, success felt like exile. He had worked so hard to build a life of opportunity, yet the cost was being paid by the one person who never asked for it. Overseas, the crisis consumed him. There were cameras, endless interviews, boardroom debates that stretched into the night. The world praised his composure, his steady hand. Reporters wrote about his resilience, about how he was the calm in the storm. But no one saw the storm inside, the guilt, the ache, the memory of a little girl asking if her father still belonged to her. In the quiet of hotel rooms, he read her old notes again and again, the crayon lines that once made him smile now cutting deeper with each glance. He began writing responses he never sent, letters filled with apologies, promises, and dreams of time they might one day share. It was his way of holding on to her from a distance, though he knew paper and ink could never replace presence. When he finally returned home weeks later, the house looked the same. But something had shifted. His daughter greeted him politely, not with the rush of arms and laughter he remembered. She had learned something in his absence. How to live without waiting. Sundar felt it immediately, the quiet gap that no words could fill. He sat with her, asked about school, listened as she spoke in short sentences. She was kind, she was respectful, but she was no longer reaching for him the way she once did. That night, Sundar lay awake again, his wife beside him. In the darkness, she spoke softly. "She is building a world without you. If you wait too long, she may not let you back in." The truth of her words left him breathless. He realized then that he was not just losing time, he was losing space in her heart. For the first time, Sundar considered stepping away from everything, even if it meant risking the future he had worked for. But he knew such a decision would shake more than his career. It would change the lives of thousands who depended on his leadership. Still, as he closed his eyes, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. What was the worth of leading the world if he could not lead himself home? The letter that spoke louder than silence. The envelope was plain, its corners slightly bent, the handwriting unfamiliar. Sundar almost set it aside with the rest of the day's mail, but something about its weight, about the way his name was written, made him pause. He sat down at the table, his daughter's laughter faintly echoing from another room, and carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, yet deliberate. "Dear Sundar, you do not know me. I am just a father. My daughter once asked me the same question yours asked you. If I saw her, if I still remembered she was there. I chose my work over her again and again until one day she stopped asking. She built a life without me. And by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late. I write to you not because I want pity, but because I heard your story. I read about your success, and I know you are standing where I once stood. Do not wait until silence answers for her. Choose her while you still can." Sundar read the words slowly, his hands trembling. He did not know how the letter had reached him, or why this stranger felt compelled to write, but it was as if fate had delivered a mirror. Every line carried the weight of a man's regret, and Sundar felt the warning echo inside him like thunder. He folded the letter carefully, placed it on the table, and walked to his daughter's room. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, lost in her drawings, her crayons scattered like fragments of a world she controlled when everything else felt uncertain. Sundar sat beside her quietly, and for the first time in weeks he did not check his phone, did not let his thoughts drift to meetings or crises. He simply watched her draw. She looked up, surprised. "Papa, aren't you busy?" The question, so innocent, carried all the weight of their distance. Sundar shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I am here." For hours they sat together. She drew. He listened, and slowly, the wall between them began to soften. She handed him a crayon and asked him to add to her picture. His lines were clumsy, uneven, but when she laughed and leaned against him, Sundar felt something he had not felt in a long time. A sense of belonging that no stage, no spotlight, no boardroom had ever given him. In the weeks that followed, Sundar began making choices differently. He still led with calmness at work, but he also learned to lead with presence at home. He turned down calls that could wait. He guarded evenings like sacred ground, and most importantly, he rebuilt the trust that had begun to slip through his hands. He was not perfect, he stumbled, he was tempted, but every time he looked at his daughter, he remembered the stranger's letter and the warning it carried. One evening, as the sun set and the house glowed in orange light, his daughter handed him another drawing. This time, the picture showed a little girl holding her father's hand. The face was no longer blank. It was filled with a smile. Sundar held the paper close, his eyes blurring with tears. He realized then that success was never about the world calling your name. It was about the people who whispered it when no one else was listening. It was about the small voices, the quiet drawings, the gentle questions that remind you of who you truly are. And so, Sundar's greatest story was not the story of becoming a CEO, not the story of leading billions, but the story of one father who nearly lost his place in his daughter's world and chose just in time to fight for it.